Well, a tough Sunday for your Las Vegas Raiders, who fall in Los Angeles to the Rams 20-15, dropping their record to 2-5 in the process. Eddie Paskal here in the fifth quarter, presented by Twitch, with my dear friend of Yahoo Sports, the great Jason Fitz. First off, Fitz, on a lighter note, is it you? Is it you? Because every time you've been on here, unfortunately, the silver and black don't taste victory. So I must ask, tongue fully in cheek, is it you, Mr. Fitz?
Here's where I went wrong. I switched seats at one point in the game, and I think that's a real problem. Like everything was going fine. It was 3-0. It felt like, okay, this thing's going to be fine. And then all I did was stand up. I got out of my chair. And the minute I stood up, the Rams scored a touchdown. So I think what it is that, I haven't found the lucky chair. But maybe I haven't also found the lucky chair for most of the last 10 years or so. So if I could find that lucky chair and just sit in it, I went through a period a few years ago where I stood every game because that seemed to be working. Now I just got to find the right comfy cushion, right seat. I think it's probably me, but it's not me and you together. It's me and my seating arrangement, obviously.
You're working through the mojo. I'm working through the mojo. And unfortunately, our beloved Raiders Fitz are also working through trying to get this mojo back to where it needs to be. Look, I think it's so easy to go quarterback. And yes, we'll talk about Gardner Minshew coming in for Aiden Gardner in a sec. But for me, Fitz, I kind of zoom out on today. And going into today, right, the two things that we heard from head coach Antonio Pierce was you got to protect the football and you have to be able to effectively run against this Rams defense that candidly was ranked worst. Like, I'm not even like throwing shade at all, was statistically the worst ranked run defense in the NFL. Well, today, the Raiders are not able to protect the football. Gardner Minshew finishes with 3 interceptions and the fumble as well. And when you look at the effectiveness of the run game, yes and no, north of 100 yards, but it felt like nothing was easy, Fitz. So let's begin here with the turnovers. You can't win in the NFL turning it over the way the Raiders did today. And unfortunately, you look at the number, 20 points off turnovers for the Rams, and that was it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you start thinking about the turnover differential and what it has meant to this
Oh,
team this year.
gosh, yeah.
It's just awful. I mean, there's no way to make this nice. Like at some point, what you need your team to do is be able to get a big turnover when they need it, and you need the team to be able to stop turning the ball over. And the crazy thing is that when this game was still in reach, the defense created a turnover. Finally, Hobbs gets a nice interception. It's an 8-point game, and you're thinking, hey, this can still turn. As ugly as this game was, this was still a winnable game all the way to the very end, and you just couldn't find a way to get the plays made. It's heartbreaking for the team because the offense couldn't get efficient enough. The offense simply could never sustain anything. They couldn't get any rhythm of what they were trying to do. Brock Bowers is a superstar and everything else was just absolutely dead in the water, right? Like, so this was just such a hard game because there was never a time, to your point, they didn't run the ball in a way that ever looked easy. When's the last time we saw a team that consistently in the red zone, you just held your breath the entire time because you thought, man, this is only going to be more difficult to get every single yard at this point. That's just where this offense is.
Yeah, and I want to, before we shift back to the offense, and we will talk about the offense in a sec, but like you said it earlier, right? The Raiders down by 8, right? Or excuse me, down by 5 with a chance to go out and win a football game, right? With less than 2 minutes left. How do we view this, right? Do we view this as like, hey, it was ugly today, it wasn't good today, all that told, the Raiders had a chance to go win a football game? Or do we kind of look at it on the converse and say, look, the Raiders essentially shot themselves in the foot again and lost a very winnable game on the road in LA?
I've said this to you before, and I hate how simple it is, but years ago, a buddy of mine said, good teams find a way to win, bad teams find a way to lose. And that's just where, when you start talking, we haven't even talked about the penalties. My God, the penalties today,
Yeah.
inopportune times constantly. So between the penalties and between the turnovers, it was, the margins are so thin. It's what we talk about every time we hang out. The margins are so thin in this league, especially when you are not, necessarily on paper, one of the great elite teams that scares everybody. You just can't make a bunch of mistakes. Heck, look at how much we respect a team like San Francisco, and look at how much their game got out of control at times against Kansas City because Brock Purdy wasn't careful with the football. Even good teams can't win. Even great teams can't win if they can't protect the football. And I'm watching a team that, between the penalties and the turnovers, this is the example of bad teams find a way to lose. This is what the Raiders have to clean up. These are the controllables that you can actually come in and say, hey, we can fix this, and it just hasn't gotten fixed yet, especially the turnover beast.
Yeah, and again, talking about the penalties, Fitz, the Raiders go 10 penalties, 80 yards. The Rams on the other side of things, 3 for 28. But really, the penalties started. It was from the second drive. I wrote this down because I was like, oh, this might be something that we need to remember later on. Penalties killed that second drive, right? The first drive, Raiders punt, Rams get the ball, they punt, right? You trade punts to start the game. Then Raiders going down. We have a DJ Glaze holding, and then an intentional grounding on Gardner Minshew. That's it, right? That is the end of the second drive, and really just kind of a microcosm for what we'd see the next 2.5, 3 quarters.
There is a spot here
Aiden,
where you
sorry,
have to understand.
Aiden had the intentional grounding. I'm sorry.
There's a spot here where you have to understand what you're good at, what you're capable of. And I saw people on Twitter last week saying, why aren't they getting the ball to the wide receivers more? Well, I think if you go back and watch the All 22, you talk to people that played the game, you talk to coaches around the league, they'll tell you that there just isn't a wide receiver group right now that creates a lot of space. It just isn't, this isn't there. So what this team has gotten good at, what they were good at in the very beginning, was trying to get the ball to the tight ends. We saw that. Like they were just going to force the ball to the guys that they could trust to make plays. The problem is that gets much more difficult when all of a sudden it's 2nd and 12. If it's 3rd and 14, like when you don't have a Devontae at this point, when you don't have a Jacoby Myers because of health, when you don't have a guy that can get open. The whole reason the Bills just gave up equity to acquire Amari Cooper is because at some point they need somebody on 3rd and long that they can trust to get open. The Raiders don't have that on this wide receiver core. The closest thing they have is Brock Bowers. And, it's just difficult when Brock is your only weapon to even find ways to force him the ball. They did, but that's that's not an ideal situation when you're in 2nd and long and 3rd and long. And the penalties, particularly for the way this offense is built, penalties are a killer. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think it was in between. It was either during halftime or right after halftime. I was talking to one of our production guys, and I was just going through the notes, and I said, if your name isn't Brock Bowers or Alexander Madison, what have you done statistically to impact this game on the offense side of the football? Because look, obviously Brock finishes his day, another superstar day for Brock, 10 for 93. But at that point, it was Brock had like 7 catches, and Madison was next with like 3. And then after that, there's this drop off to like, where's the rest of that depth? Where's the rest of the playmakers in that receiver room, right? And look, I think we have to be very clear and very transparent and very honest about the fact that yes, you're down Devontae Adams, who's now a New York Jet. Yes, you're down Jacoby Myers, who's dealing with his fair share of injury right now. But you have to. There has to be a collective buildup, right? There has to be a collective. We are going to do this in that room, and I'm not throwing shade at any of the guys in that room. I'm just saying, like, in order for this team to be successful in a sustained way, you just have to get more production from that group.
The hard part is I hear you. I think you're right. I don't know if
Where it
this
comes from,
group
yeah.
can make that happen. And I'll go back to, I know it's basketball, it's a much different sport, but I'll never forget. I was laughing with Danny Green, who obviously played a long time in the NBA, and Danny was talking about one time that Pop was coaching him on something. They coached the Spurs on something all week, and they worked on something all week for the team. And Danny obviously played in the league, like he knows what he's doing. They got out in the game and they were getting their butts kicked, and they sat down on the bench and they got to their first time out. They were just absolutely going off the court. And one of the guys looked at the other guys and said, "We worked on this all week. Why isn't it working?" And Danny said, "We can work on it all week, but if we're not good enough, there's nothing we can do about it." And Danny flat out admitted, as an athlete at the highest possible level, it didn't work because they were taking on a team that was just flat out better. Now, the Rams are not flat out better. The hard part is, if you're the Raiders, I don't know, when you just didn't have a contingency plan for Devontae and Jacoby both being out. There isn't a number 1 receiver on this roster. You got to find ways to manufacture new number 1 opportunities. And man, that's really hard to do. I'm surprised Brock got to the catches he got, because I figure at some point the other team's just going to be like, you know what? We'll put 4 guys on him. I don't care. Dare anybody else to beat us. And they'd be right in doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll obviously at some point later today, Fitz, we'll go through all of the incredible Brock Bowers stats and kind of where he ranks statistically in the grand scheme of not only the NFL, but the Raiders franchise. And really I think incredible probably isn't strong enough of a word for the start that he's had in silver and black. But I think the other thing that we also need to just acknowledge, right, is the shuffling on the offensive line again. Right, and Dylan Parham's down today. Jordan Meredith comes in, and you and I have talked about this a lot, right? Where you cannot get any type of cohesion with the big boys up front unless they have time on task together. And today, just another example. And look, the injuries are a part of the game in the NFL, right? It's the part of the game that we all hate is that, there's this element of luck in staying healthy, right? There's this element of the ball bouncing your way, or we see it across the league every single week where a guy steps the wrong way, friendly fire in the back of his knee, right? Like there is an element of just kind of getting some good fortune. The Raiders along the offensive line haven't had that quite yet. And so, again, we look at the starting five today, and we see kind of that lack of cohesion. We kind of see that inability for, to carry out sustained drives and keep the quarterback upright. Because look, whether it was Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, right? Like those guys did not have the time in the pocket. I think that the team would collectively like them to have this afternoon.
And that's fair. Like this is where you mentioned earlier, everybody talks about the quarterbacks. I can't stress two things can be true. The quarterback can need to be better. And also the offensive line can go a long way and try to help that. And that's
Hmm.
just not happening right now. It's just that at some point you got to look across the board and say, okay, what is the learning curve for DJ, right? Like, what is the learning curve for all of these guys working together? JPJ coming in, like, you got two rookies on this offensive line being asked to do a lot in this game, right? And then on top of that, while they're trying to be asked to do a lot, they're trying to learn how to work with the guys around them, which is also, by the way, requiring everybody around them to do more communicating. So it's interesting that you can't just relax. Any of the five on that offensive line can't just relax and know lockstep. The guy next to them's got it. Everything's fine. There's got to be this different heightened level of communication in everything they do, which means none of it feels natural. And doesn't that reflect in some of the pass blocking? Doesn't that reflect, man, it feels like every time there's a well-timed exotic blitz, it gets through because the offensive line doesn't know who's picking up what. You got two guys blocking one and two people coming free on the other side. Like that's a miscommunication. So, I think what you say is so important here because sometimes you see a guy get burned all the time. You say, okay, well, they're just not talented enough. This offensive line is letting stuff get through because they don't know how to communicate what's happening. That's a much different problem. And the only way you fix that problem is with practices, is with time, with games, the same five being out there. That just hasn't happened.
Yeah, and I think that's like if you're a Raider fan, right? Like that's not what you want to hear, but that's reality, right? Like that is the reality of the situation for the offensive line of the Las Vegas Raiders in 2024. But I know we mentioned at the top, Fitz, Aiden O'Connell gets the start today, his second start of 2024. He goes 6 of 10, 52 yards, comes out with injury after that second drive. Gardner Minshew takes us the rest of the way, going 15 of 34, 154, and not one, not two, but unfortunately three interceptions today that candidly were one of these main reasons why the Raiders are not going to fly back to Las Vegas with a win tonight. I know such a small sample size, but what did you think of Aiden's two drives this afternoon?
They were fine. I mean, there's just a moment here where you mentioned nothing comes out easy. I think the hardest part of this, and I really, obviously, we always root for the health and safety of players, number one. For the Raiders, man, you really need Aiden to get in there if you can, because you need to see what you got. Like, you
Hmm.
need a good understanding of exactly what the ceiling for Aiden is. And I know everybody's already obsessed with, well, we're just going to go out in the draft and find a quarterback next year. I would remind everybody that's not that easy, right? So you got to figure out, there's a lot to figure out with this roster. And you also got to figure out with everybody else how you get better, and right now, Gardner just doesn't seem this year. Gardner seems to have more turnover issues than I've ever seen in his career. I don't know an easy way to fix that. Like, this isn't a young player that's turnover happy. This is a seasoned vet that knows what he's doing. That is just, he's got the yips right now. He's got a case of the turnovers. So I think Aiden in there would give everybody a little bit more confidence with that stuff. But also look at the one play that we saw where, Gardner was actually able to duck under the pass rusher, step up and make a throw. It was a beautiful moment by Gardner, to give him credit. Aiden never could have done that, right? So we still have to acknowledge that whoever's behind center is going to have to do a lot of lifting in this offense the way it's currently built.
So, kind of a zoom out. I don't want to say meta question, Fizz, but it was kind of been the conversation that we've been having in the studio, really, I guess, since the second half, right? You look at the turnover differential now for the silver and black. Last I checked, it was minus 13. I can't remember if that was before or after the Hobbs interception. So, forgive me. It's either minus 13 or minus 12, somewhere in that vicinity. In a big picture type of way, how is that fixed? Right, outside of putting the blame squarely on one person, right? In this case, the quarterback. Outside of putting the blame squarely on one person on the defense, like what is the long-term sustainable solution to protecting the football, but also on the other side, forcing and succeeding on more explosive defensive plays too? Like I mean that genuinely, right? Because I don't have an answer to that part of it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the defensive side, being a ball hawk is something that's taught. The problem is, and it becomes a part of culture and practices. Like they talk about it all the time. How are you knocking the ball out? There's a great video that's going viral right now with Belichick talking about different techniques to knocking the ball out. The problem is this Raiders defense hasn't tackled very well. And so if you talk to guys around the league, they'll tell you that if you're focused on fundamental tackling, you're not focused on knocking the ball out. So, knocking the ball out and get more turnovers that way is not going to be the easiest thing for this year's defense to do. Then the other side of it, when you talk about offensively, how do you fix it? Well, Gardner's just going to have to take sacks. He's just
Mm.
going to have to accept that, at some point these drives are going to end, and that's just the way it's going to be. Unfortunately, the turnover problem, when you mentioned the minus 12 or 13, hasn't just been Gardner. I mean, a couple games ago, it was just a stupid fumble from a running back moment. That's just, it's one of those football
Yeah.
plays, and it killed all the momentum. And the thing of it is, the crushing thing of it is, like, there are two separate conversations. Could the Raiders win more games? And are the Raiders a really good football team right now? I do not believe today, as they stand constructed, as they are playing right now, the Raiders are playing like a really good football team. I think we can all agree with that. However, they've been in some of these games. They've had some opportunities to make these games wins. That's where the turnovers have to go away if you want to have a shot at it. Like, it's wild. We're going to look back on this game the rest of the year and say, how did we lose that Rams game? And it really comes down to carelessness with the football when you're trying to make a play. I'll erase the end of the game interception because that's Gardner just running around like a chicken with his head cut off, hoping to God. But up until that point, man, just he's got to be better at taking the sack and or laying down and just saying, hey, we're going to live to see another down.
But I think, this isn't me pushing back, because this is me just kind of trying to extrapolate on that a little bit. Isn't that a little bit harder to do mindset wise when you're playing from behind? Right? Because, like, if you're Gardner, you haven't had the luxury of playing with a lead, and certainly not today, right? So, like, don't you feel like I mean, I know it's such a fine line between, like, forcing it and also understanding, to your point, live to, play another down, but, like, that I feel like would be a challenge for a quarterback when you are coming from behind and you are trying to be this energizer bunny and ignite an offense that has struggled to find any type of consistency now through 7 games of 2024. So I totally get it, but, like, it feels like easier said than done sometimes, you know?
Yeah, no, it's against the natural instinct. And look, you make it to the NFL because you're one of the best in the world. Like, this insert player name here sucks that we all say. I think we need to understand that whatever quarterback we're talking about in the NFL, whatever offensive lineman we're talking about, whatever safety we're talking about, you're talking about one of the 100 best in the world at what they do, right? So obviously there's a level of greatness, and for all of them, their nature is to make plays. That's how you got to the league. For years, you were saving teams. Like, you were the reason that teams won games. Unfortunately, now in the NFL, that becomes the reason that your team is losing games. And there's no easy solution. Like, I am usually, as you know, I am a beacon of light in a dark, dark world. I'm the one that comes in and says, hey, we can find this. This fixes
Mhm.
itself. I'll be honest. I don't, as the Raiders are currently constructed, I don't think there's an easy solution right now on the roster or available to the roster that suddenly changes the way this team is going to look the rest of the season. So now it really becomes, how do you maximize what you have and figure out how to just eke out some ugly wins? How do you make every football game ugly, stuck in the mud, and then just try and turn it into a one-score game and figure out how to win those one-score games? And that's also easier said than done.
And to be fair though, Fitz, right? We talk about the identity of this team, right? You talk about playing kind of that ugly, nasty, smash mouth, not overly sexy football. That's what AP wants to do, right? So you look at the way that the roster is currently constructed, and certainly you are down some bodies in that wide receiver room today, in particular without Jacoby. And yes, you are trying to get more consistent play from the quarterbacks. And yes, the defense has kind of had. I mean, I think by and large today they played pretty well, all things considered. But you haven't found that
Yeah.
consistency from Pat Graham's group in 2024 all that much. So, but it feels like, if what you're asking them to do, it feels like, at least mentality wise and personnel wise, they are capable of doing that. Now it's just a matter of execution and going out there and doing it. And you look at, I think one of my big questions for today, which unfortunately we won't get an answer to, right, because the quarterback changed a little bit, is how do the Raiders respond after those first 3 drives, right? Because, we've seen the past couple weeks where, hey, the first drive looks great. The first 2 drives look great. But then everything kind of goes off kilter a little bit as we get into the second quarter and beyond. And today, I don't think it's fair to do an apples to apples comparison from the last couple of weeks, because you had a surprise quarterback change due to injury. But, like, that to me will still be one of the biggest questions that we have the rest of the way, Fitz, is like, how is this offense, regardless of who's under center, right? Regardless of who's in that receiver room, regardless of who's up and who's down in the tight end group, like, how are they able, with the guys that they have available on a game day, how are they able to do it for 60 minutes, even if it ain't very pretty?
Yeah, and So much of that, what you're talking about are the adjustments that are so beautiful to watch, right? And seeing how teams counter what the Raiders are doing, then how the Raiders are supposed to counter that counter is what's interesting. And it's just like, look at the team sometimes, the way we look at snap to snap, what Max Crosby does. Like, think about how Max will come out early in the game and he'll do one move, and then he'll come back later in the same situation to do a totally different move out of that same situation. Versatility out of what he's doing is part of what makes Max great. Every player has to find that, and the
Hmm.
coaches have to find the best out of that for every single player. That's man, that's hard to do. Like I think this season is about gritting out tough ugly wins. And how do you do that? Man, that's a mentality. That's a fight. There's a dog in all of that. Like there are all of these cliches that we hear coaches speak. I think that that's part of what the Raiders are going to have to embrace. You're just going to have to embrace some level of, hey, this is not going to be pretty, but we're going to win games. But you also got to stack wins. Like the
Hmm.
problem with a losing streak when things aren't pretty is that a losing streak can become a losing culture. And that's what AP's got to fix. Like that's where you have to trust the AP, the former player, knows how to speak to players. Like he's seen a lot more football than most of us can ever imagine. He's seen good and bad. He's seen great and terrible. You know, if you're Max that's been on bad teams that knows he knows what it's like to turn around a bad team. Those are the moments that the players are going to have to look each other in the eye and figure out what they're fighting for. And that we're already at that spot at 2-5 where they got to figure out what they're fighting for, and they got to find that little extra juice to fight for AP and to fight for each other. And until that happens, man, it's going to be ugly.
Yeah, I mean, not to look ahead too far, Fitz, but I mean, they're gonna have to find that juice quick, fast, in a hurry. You got the Kansas City Chiefs, the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs, coming to Allegiant a week from today. But we were talking earlier about, you said, man, it just feels like I've never seen Gardner turn the ball over the way that he has in his career. And he literally just finished wrapping up with the media, and he said, "quote When asked about the issues with the turnovers, quote It's super frustrating. I've never turned the ball over like this in my entire life." So Gardner obviously just as befuddled maybe as the rest of us on why it has looked like this, especially today, kind of coming in relief. So, I mean, you hope now, right? And you and I, as we sit here and record this just a touch before 5 o'clock Pacific, don't have a full understanding of Aiden's injury. But if Gardner is going to be the guy for the foreseeable future, if you could wave the magic wand and say, you got to do this one thing, it's protect the football, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, you and I have joked for years that there are two weapons on this team that can never be questioned. One happens to be a punter, one happens to be a kicker. So
Five for
if
five,
you're Aiden,
baby.
use those weapons. Like just if you're Aiden, use those weapons. Like you got a punter that will always be able to flip the field. So what's it matter? Like what hurts more, taking the sack and the punt or the interception? And Gardner, I should say, is going to have to remind himself of that consistently. What hurts more, taking the sack, punting, or the interception? He's just going to have to swallow the football behind an offensive line that I think is giving him a little bit of the yips right now. Like it feels like, as we are in playoff baseball, sometimes a baseball player just gets a little bit of the yips and it changes his swing, and all of a sudden everything's different. Feels like Gardner's got a little bit of that. So he's got to find a way to calm down and just eat the sack if that's what it takes.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that is kind of figuring it out, kind of coming back to center a little bit, doing the simple things right. But I think a lot of that too is just getting the ball to your playmakers, right, and not overcomplicating it. And certainly we hope Jacoby is back sooner than later. But I mean, man, through what, 7 games now, Brock Bowers has been. I mean, whatever we thought we were going to get in April when when
Superstar.
they drafted this kid in the first round has been even better. I just want to run through real quick some of the incredible. I joked about. I tweeted this out earlier. I was like, the weekly. Hey, here's what historic thing Brock Bowers did this week. Tweet is becoming pretty fun. Brock Bowers now has 40. This was before he finished. 43 receptions through his first 7 career games, the most in NFL history by a tight end through their first 7 career games, passing Heath Jackson from 1988. Another good one. Brock Bowers is the first Raider rookie with 6 or more catches in the first half of a game since James Jett in Week 12 of
Oof.
1993. And then here is another fantastic one. Brock Bowers is the first tight end in Raiders history, rookie or not, Fitz, with 8+ receptions in 3 straight games. I mean, you can just go through. We do this every single week, but man, this kid is fun to watch.
He's a superstar, and everybody's trying to stop him, and they can't. I mean, just, if we're being real, everybody knows the ball's going to Brock, and you just can't shut it down. And when he was drafted, there were people that obviously questioned the draft pick. And what I kept saying at the time is, now you just got a tight end that can also be essentially your wide receiver one. We have spent a generation talking about watching the Antonio Gates and the Travis Kelce's of the world go up against us, and we've been looking for ours. I think that at the end of all of this, not only does he have a chance of being equally as good as any of those players I just mentioned, he has a chance of being far more dynamic in what he does than either of those players I just mentioned. I think Brock Bowers has real potential to be a superstar in this league for the next 10 years. And realistically, when you're picking in the first round of the draft, sometimes you just look at it and say, we need superstars. So, as much as there's a lot to be, down about after a loss, I will say we're never down about Max and we're never going to be down about Brock. Like they're just two guys that personify work, that work their tails off, that are absolutely going to be legends at their position.
I think for me, Fitz, and you and I have talked about this a bunch, where it's like I live, from July until February, kind of in this little silver and black cocoon, right? Where like I don't have a great, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe I don't have a great perspective on the rest of the league. Like obviously I know who, I do my homework on who the team's playing that week, and I feel pretty good about the AFC West. But like for me to be big, zoom out, take Eddie on the NFL is like, that's just not me, right? Because I'm so ingrained in, oh, who's our practice squad lineman that's going to come up this week, right? I think the most kind of, oh my gosh moment I've had maybe this season was, I don't know if you caught it, it was in the first quarter going to break. And it was after Brock had one of his catches, and Kevin Harlan on the bump out goes, and there he goes, the best tight end in the NFL is a rookie, and he plays for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I was like, man, if you're having people at the national level, right, Kevin Harlan, guys at the national level who are saying this about Brock Bowers 7 games in, like, I don't know, man. It was a pretty cool, like, oh man, like this dude's like pretty legit kind of moment.
Yeah, and I don't doubt any of that. I always go back to my phone blowing up when he was picked, and I was sitting there doing the Yahoo NFL draft show at the time, and I looked down, and the amount of smart people that have covered the league for a long time that send me texts after losses is like, "Sorry, your team stinks." The amount of those people that sent me texts, it was like, "This is the smartest move this team has done in a long time," and it was universal praise. I didn't have a single really brilliant football mind text me anything other than praise when he was selected for a reason. Like, look at Georgia's offense now, and you'll understand exactly how important Brock Bowers was last year. So, Lab McConkey gets a little of that credit too. But you look at the way Brock has played the game, and it's translated to the NFL level immediately. I look forward to seeing what this will look like for Brock when the offense has enough weapons around him that he can't simply be singled out. He has the chance to be monstrous for a generation.
And the best part too is, I don't want to say the best part, Fitz, but one of the maybe unsung parts is this dude is becoming even better and better and better in the run game too. Like this is not a one-trick pony kind of freak athlete tight end that was kind of en vogue in 2024. Like this is a dude who is about as complete can come, or as complete as complete can be. But Fitz,
One other
yeah, yeah, go for
beautiful
it.
thing,
Yeah, yeah,
Eddie.
yeah.
He's 21.
Oh, that's
Like
crazy.
in a world where NFL rookies come out now and some are 23, 24, and they have no, Brock Bowers is 21. So just do that math in your head and just realize that, man, got a weapon for a generation. He's 21.
And he's a NorCal guy, man. Reps the 707. So shout out to Brock. But obviously not the day the silver and black we're hoping for today. Mr. Fitz again, 2015 falling to the Rams, and we talked about it a second ago. Patrick Mahomes and the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs coming to Allegiant Stadium a week from today. So I won't even ask you what the Raiders need to do to win, right? But what needs to be figured out in the next 7 business days as Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and the gentleman from Kansas City come to Allegiant Stadium?
Kansas City is, as a team right now, broken in the minds of so many, and all they do is win. And what's funny to me is that Kansas City is still angry. Chiefs players are still angry that the Raiders beat them last year. Like that is real and that is in everybody's mind. So what the Raiders need to do, they need to focus on withstanding the first 10 minutes of this football game. Because the last thing you want to do is get out of yourself trying to keep up with the just the barrage of punches. I think you are going to have the bully that got their butts kicked coming into Allegiant saying, no, no, no. We're gonna pay this back, and we're gonna pay this back in a big, big way. AP is gonna have to get this team fired up. They're gonna have to come out and absolutely. I think if you hit Kansas City in the mouth hard enough, you'll get them a little shell shocked based on what we saw last year, right? That this gets back in their head. But man, Kansas City, I've talked to people around that team that know that team well. They have circled this on their calendar. They are coming in for blood. I think the Raiders are going to have to protect the football, as we know. But most importantly, they're going to have to control emotion, and they're going to have to figure out how to withstand 10 minutes of absolute hell when that game starts.
And if memory serves, Fitz, the Silver and Black, the last team that actually beat the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Like that's still that
Yeah,
that is still fair and accurate. It's gonna
and
look,
and they know that.
yeah.
And they know that.
Yes, they do. It's going to be a lot of fun, man. I mean, obviously, I think, old man Eddie on the porch, like there's always the element of I really appreciate those old AFC West rivalries, right? So anytime the Raiders and the Chiefs get together, whether it's here or in Kansas City, like it's gritty, it's nasty, and like we were talking about, that's the kind of game the Raiders are going to have to play to kind of get themselves out of this funk. Well, Fitz, I know you're up against it because you have so much work to do. So please, please, please tell the people at home what you're up to and where they can find you.
Be sure to check out Yahoo Sports. You can follow me on social media at Jason Fitz. Also, check out Inside Coverage. It's our podcast 3 times a week on all things NFL, and also the College Football Power Hour, which is our college football podcast twice a week. So check out Yahoo Sports or check me out at Jason Fitz and hang out with me all week long.
Yeah, I would like to hang out with you all week long, but unfortunately, I only get to see you on game days. But I will take what I can get. Jason Fitz, as I said, man, not the day that we were hoping for, but it was great to see you. And we will see you, man. Okay, let's do this. Can we will a win for Fitz? We need for you. We need to will a win one of the weeks that you're on with us. So obviously, I would love for it to be Sunday, a week from today, against the Kansas City Chiefs. But I know the next time we have you is 2 weeks from today against the Bengals. So 2 wins in succession, and all will be forgiven, and life will be good, and you'll find the magic chair that you need to sit on, and it'll be sunshine and roses. How about that?
I'm gonna go comfy chair shopping. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah,
Like I
please
gotta
do.
find a new comfy chair, something I can, wiggle my butt in.
Exactly. Mixing up the mojo, baby. We got to do it. So, ready, Paskal, my guy, Jason Fitz, and everyone else at Silver and Black Productions, thank you, thank you, thank you for hanging out with us. Enjoy the week, Raider Nation. We will see you guys next week, same time, same place, for our next episode of the Fifth Quarter, presented by Twitch.